The story always starts the same way. A woman walking her child on a cold January morning in 1947. She sees what she thinks is a mannequin tossed on a vacant lot in Los Angeles. It's pale, broken in the middle, but it's not a mannequin, it's the body of a young woman. Her name was Elizabeth Short. The newspapers would soon call her the Black Dahlia. Her body was posed, drained of blood, cut clean in half at the waist. Her face was carved into a gruesome smile, a cut from ear to ear. The murder was brutal, but it was also precise. It was a spectacle. The killer wanted it to be found. He wanted people to see his work. The case became an obsession for Los Angeles, and for the whole country. It was the biggest mystery in a city built on manufactured dreams and hidden secrets. The police investigated hundreds of suspects. Dozens of people confessed, but the case went cold. It stayed cold for decades. It became, one of those great unsolved American crimes. A piece of dark folklore. But what if the answer was there all along? What if the killer wasn't some drifter or a random madman? What if he was one of Hollywood's elite? A man of power, intelligence, and influence. A man so far above suspicion that he could kill in plain sight and get away with it. This is the story of Dr. George Hodel, and the theory pushed forward by his own son that he was the Black Dahlia killer. To understand this theory, you have to understand the man. George Hodel was not an ordinary person. He was a genius, a child prodigy with an IQ of 186. He was also a doctor, a specialist in venereal diseases. He ran a clinic in Los Angeles that put him in contact with all sorts of people. He was well known in the city's high society. He lived in a strange, Mayan-inspired house designed by Lloyd Wright, the son of the famous architect Frank Lloyd Wright, the Sowden House. It was a place known for its wild parties, its avant-garde art, and its secrets. Dr. Hodel was connected. He was friends with artists like Man Ray and John Huston. He was part of the surrealist art scene, a movement fascinated by dreams, violence, and the subconscious. He was brilliant, charming, and successful. But there was another side to him. A much darker side. He was obsessed with sex, power, and control. There were whispers of orgies, of illegal abortions performed at his clinic. He had a history of scandal. In 1945, his own daughter, Tamar, accused him of incest. It went to trial. The case was a sensation, but Hodel was a powerful man with good lawyers. He was acquitted. The scandal, however, hinted at a deep sickness beneath the sophisticated surface. The story might have ended there. Hodel would have been just another footnote in LA history. A brilliant but corrupt doctor from a bygone era. But then his son, Steve Hodel, started digging. Steve Hodel was not like his father. He was a cop, a homicide detective for the lap dad. He spent his career putting bad guys away. After he retired, his father passed away. Steve was going through his father's old things. He found a small photo album. Inside were pictures of his father's friends, family, and associates. And then he saw her. A picture of a young woman with dark hair and a sad, hopeful smile. He was sure it was Elizabeth Short. Then he found another photo of the same woman. This was the start of an obsession that would consume the rest of his life. Steve, the detective, started investigating his own father. He didn't want to believe it. But the more he looked, the more the pieces started to fit. He used his skills as a homicide investigator to build a case, piece by piece, against the man who raised him. The first major piece was the medical evidence. The way Elizabeth Short's body was bisected is called a hemicorprectomy. It's a very specific and difficult medical procedure. The cut was clean, precise. It was made between the second and third lumbar vertebrae, severing the intestine without breaking the bone. This wasn't the work of a clumsy butcher. It was the work of someone with skill. Someone with surgical training, someone like a doctor. George Hodel was a surgeon. He'd had that training in medical school. Steve Hodel believed his father had the exact skills needed to perform the mutilation. Then there was the art connection. George Hodel was a close friend of the surrealist artist Man Ray. One of Man Ray's most famous paintings is called Les Amoureux, or The Lovers. It shows a pair of disembodied, smiling red lips floating in the sky. The smile carved onto Elizabeth Short's face, the so-called Glasgow smile, was an almost perfect copy of the lips in that painting. Another Man Ray photograph shows a woman's head and torso posed in a way eerily similar to how Elizabeth Short's upper body was found. The surrealists were obsessed with this kind of imagery. The dismemberment of the female form was a common theme in their art. They were fascinated by the Marquis de Sade, a writer famous for his stories of sexual cruelty. George Hodel was deeply embedded in this world. He didn't just appreciate the art, he lived the philosophy. Steve Hodel argued that the murder itself was a piece of surrealist art. The body wasn't just dumped, it was posed, displayed. It was a statement, a twisted masterpiece created by a man who saw himself as an artist of death. The connections kept piling up. Steve looked at the letters the killer sent to the newspapers. The killer taunted the police. He sent a package containing some of Elizabeth Short's belongings. The letters were written in a distinct, blocky style. Steve hired handwriting experts. They compared the killer's notes to samples of his father's writing. The verdict came back. It was a probable match. One expert said it was a highly probable match. The way the letters were formed, the spacing, the style, it all pointed to George Hodel. But the most damning evidence came from a place Steve Hodel never expected. The archives of his own police department, the Lapded. He discovered that back in 1949, 2 years after the Dahlia murder, the Lapded had actually considered his father a prime suspect. They didn't just suspect him. They were so sure he was their man that they bugged his house. For weeks, they secretly recorded everything that was said inside the Sowden house. The transcripts of those recordings are chilling. They paint a picture of a man spiraling out of control. A man who knows the walls are closing in. On the tapes, George Hodel is heard talking to his associates about the police. He talks about paying people off, about leaving the country. He says things like, "They can't prove a thing." And then there's the one conversation that changes everything. On February 19th, 1950, Hodel is alone in his house. He's talking to himself, or perhaps to a visitor who isn't picked up by the microphone. He talks about his secretary, who was being questioned by the police. He talks about her death, possibly from an overdose he provided. And then he says the words that seem to seal his fate. He says, "Supposin' I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." It's not a full confession, it's hypothetical. Supposin' I did it. But for a homicide detective like Steve Hodel, it was as close as it could get. It was a man, in the privacy of his own home, admitting he could have done it. And admitting that a key witness was now dead. The Lapded had this tape. They had him as a suspect. So why didn't they arrest him? Why didn't they charge him? This is where the story gets even darker. George Hodel wasn't just a doctor. He ran an illegal abortion clinic. This was a time when abortion was a serious crime. His clinic served the powerful and the famous. Hollywood stars, politicians' wives, the daughters of police officials. And Hodel knew their secrets. He had leverage. He could bring down half the city's elite with him. The theory is that the Lapded backed off. They had their man, but prosecuting him would have created a scandal so big it would have destroyed careers and reputations across Los Angeles. There was too much at stake. The district attorney at the time was part of the investigation team that bugged Hodel's house. Steve Hodel believes the DA himself shut the case down to avoid the political fallout. So George Hodel was allowed to slip away. Shortly after the bugs were discovered, he left the country. He moved to Asia and lived there for decades before returning to the United States in his old age. The case officially remained unsolved. Steve Hodel's investigation didn't stop with the Black Dahlia. He started to believe his father was not just a one-time killer. He believed he was a serial killer. He connected his father to a series of other unsolved murders in Los Angeles from the same time period, known as the Lone Woman Murders. These were women who were killed and dumped in a similar fashion. He even found evidence suggesting his father could have been the infamous lipstick killer in Chicago in the 1940s before he moved to LA. The patterns, the victimology, the geographic locations, it all seemed to point back to one man moving across the country, leaving a trail of bodies. He even brought in a cadaver dog, a dog trained to find the scent of human remains, to his father's old home, the Sowden house. The dog alerted in several spots in the basement. It suggested that a body, or bodies, may have been in that house. It wasn't proof of murder, but it was another unsettling piece of a very dark puzzle. So, you have a mountain of circumstantial evidence. The suspect had the medical skills. He had the psychological profile of a sadistic, narcissistic killer. He had a connection to the surrealist art that seemed to inspire the crime. His handwriting matched the killer's. He was the prime suspect of the Lapded in 1950. And he was caught on tape practically admitting he could have done it. It's a powerful case. For many, it solves the mystery. It provides a face for the monster who killed Elizabeth Short. But it's not that simple. Every theory has its holes, and the Dr. Hodel theory has some big ones. First, the evidence is all circumstantial. There is no physical proof, no DNA, no fingerprint, no bloody knife found in his house, nothing that directly and irrefutably ties George Hodel to the crime scene or the body. In a court of law today, this case would be incredibly difficult to prosecute. Let's look at the key pieces of evidence again, the photos in the album. Steve Hodel is convinced they are of Elizabeth Short, but others are not so sure. Some photo analysis experts have said it's her. Others have said it's definitely not her. The woman in the photos has different teeth, a different facial structure. Without a positive identification, the photos are just intriguing, not conclusive. The handwriting analysis. Again, experts disagree. While some say it's a match, others say it's not. Handwriting analysis is not a hard science like DNA. It's subjective, it can be a useful tool, but it's rarely a smoking gun on its own. The supposed confession on the lap deed tape. Supposin' I did kill the Black Dahlia. It's a damning line. But it's not I killed the Black Dahlia. Was he toying with the police he knew were listening? Was he simply speaking in hypotheticals about his legal situation? Without the full context, it's hard to know for sure. It's suggestive, but it's not an unambiguous confession. And then there's the source of the theory himself, Steve Hodel. He is George Hodel's son. He has built a second career out of this investigation. He has written multiple books, he gives lectures, he has a website. Critics say he has a financial motive to keep the theory alive. They argue he's a son trying to make sense of a monstrous father, and in the process he has become blind to any evidence that doesn't fit his narrative. He sees his father everywhere because he's looking for him. It's a classic case of confirmation bias, they say. This is not to say Steve Hodel is dishonest. By all accounts, he is a dedicated and thorough investigator. But the personal connection makes it complicated. It's both the theory's greatest strength code, who would know a man better than his own son. His own daughter suspected him. Another prominent suspect was Leslie Dillon, an aspiring writer who seemed to know details about the crime that hadn't been made public. The police focused on him for a while before letting him go. The Black Dahlia case is not a story with only one suspect. It's a web with dozens of them. So where does that leave us? Could a man like George Hodel, a prominent Hollywood doctor, have been the Black Dahlia killer? The answer is yes, it's absolutely possible. The theory is compelling. It answers a lot of questions that other theories don't. It explains the surgical precision. It explains the artistic, surrealist nature of the crime. It explains why the killer was never caught. The idea of a monster hiding in plain sight, protected by his wealth and his connections, is a terrifying one. It feels true to the spirit of old Hollywood, a place of bright lights and deep shadows. The George Hodel theory fits the narrative of Los Angeles itself. A beautiful, glamorous facade hiding something rotten underneath. A city where power and money could literally let you get away with murder. The Soden House still stands in Los Angeles. It's a historical landmark. People have lived in it since Hodel left. But knowing its history, you can't look at it the same way. You imagine the parties, you imagine the secrets, you imagine the evil that might have taken place within its strange stone walls. The case of the Black Dahlia is officially still open. It is unsolved. Steve Hodel has presented his case to the lapdog and the LA District Attorney's Office. He believes he has solved it beyond a reasonable doubt. He even believes the DA's office privately agrees with him. But without new concrete evidence, the case will likely never be officially closed. In the end, we are left with a story. A powerful story. A story of a son hunting his own father. It's a story of a brilliant man who may have been a monster. A story that pulls back the curtain on the glamour of old Hollywood and reveals something ugly and terrifying. We may never know for sure who killed Elizabeth Short. Her murder has become a modern myth. But the theory that it was Dr. George Hodel is the closest anyone has ever come to an answer. It's an answer that is complex, disturbing, and in its own strange way, makes a terrifying amount of sense. It suggests the real monsters aren't always hiding in the alleys. Sometimes they are sitting at the best tables, at the most exclusive parties, smiling right at you.